All right, we are going to get started. Again, I'm Miss Vukmanic. If you forgot, it's been forever. Last time I've seen you, we've been talking about outer space and planets and astronauts and all sorts of cool stuff like that. Today, we are going to dive deep into the ocean. We're going to start talking about water and the ocean, okay? Oh, that's cool, Lenora. Okay, so to start, we're going to do something really simple, and we're going to do will it sink or will it float? So I have a job for you. If you think something will float up on top of the water, I'm going to have you give me a thumbs up. So it floats. Can you show me a thumbs up for floating? It floats. Now, if you think it's going to sink underwater, what should we do with our thumb? Yep, it's going to go to the bottom. We're going to sink to the bottom, okay? So I have 10 different items, and we're going to test them out to see if they sink or if they float, all right? So I'm going to move my water over here. I'm going to move this camera a little bit so you can see it better. All right. Okay, so my first item today is a cute little rubber ducky. So do you think my rubber ducky is going to float at the top? Give me a thumbs up. Or do you think it's going to sink to the bottom? All right, let's see what happens. Oh, it floated right on top. Those are fun in the bathtub, right? Because they float and you can find them. So up here where I have my rubber ducky, I'm going to put the it can float. All right. My next item today is a little sponge. It's like that you wash your dishes with. Do you think this is going to float on top, or do you think it's going to sink to the bottom? All right, I see a little bit of both. Here we go. Oh, it's floating. It's getting wetter. What's it doing now? It is sinking to the bottom. So it can float, but then when it gets wet, it gets real heavy and it's going to sink to the bottom. All right, maybe I'll mark a sink and float on that one. It can sink, or it can float and then it sinks. All right, my next two, I have two balls. They're the exact same shape. They're different colors and they weigh differently. This red ball is really light. This blue ball is really heavy. What do you think is going to happen with the red ball? Okay, maybe it'll float. What do you think is going to happen to the blue ball? Maybe it'll sink. I'm going to do both of them at the same time. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that one went right down to the bottom and this one's staying on top. Even if I push it, it's just going to come back up. So our red one that's lightweight is going to float, and our blue one that's heavy is going to sink. I'm getting very wet here. This is a fun experiment you can try at home. Ask your parents first, but if you're in the bathtub or if you've got a sink full of water that you can do, or when it gets nicer out, probably not this week, you can go outside with a bucket of water and see if things sink or float. All right, the next ones, I have 3 cubes, okay? I have a wooden cube, I have a metal cube, and I have a little foam cube, okay? What do you think is going to happen to the wooden cube? It's going to float or sink. All right. Oh, it's floating. It's kind of down there. What about a metal cube? It's kind of heavy. Let's see. Oh, that went right to the bottom. What about a foam cube? Squishy. Ah, I see some people think it's going to do like the sponge. Let's see. It's floating. All right, so we can say that our wooden cube floats, our metal cube sinks, and let's keep this in here for another minute to see if it changes. Right now it is floating. Should have gotten a paper towel because I'm drenched. All right, next I have a big marble. And there's some weight to this. What do you think is going to happen to my marble? Okay, let's see. Oh, right to the bottom. sank immediately. How about a key? It's a little bit heavy. Yeah, right to the bottom. It sank. And my last item is a little toy boat. What do you think the toy boat's gonna do? We hope it would float, right? If it's a boat. It does, it floats. I wonder, there's some holes in this boat. I wonder what would happen if it's filled with water now. That's what happens with a real boat, right? If it gets filled with water, it's gonna sink to the bottom because it's too heavy. All right, our sponge or our foam one still, it's still floating, even when I fill it with water. So that's gonna be a float, and our boat can float too, unless we capsize it. All right. So we saw some items that sink and float, but do you know why they sink and float? Do you know what makes something sink or float? All right, I'm gonna show you guys a quick little video. I'm gonna dry myself off. So I'm gonna share my screen with you real quick, and we're going to see why things sink and float. I'll be right back with you. All right.
Pond, or maybe you like to bring a bunch of toys into the tub. Either way, you've probably found that not all objects act the same when they're in the water. Some things sink right to the bottom, while other things float on the top. Why does that happen? Well, I brought some friends to see if we can figure that out.
Hi, everyone. My name's Webb,
And hi, I'm his sister, Bill. Since we live in a pond, we see a lot of things sink.
and a lot of things float.
I bet. You know, you can actually learn a lot about something by seeing what it does in the water. So I'd say this calls for an experiment. First, we'll need a pretty big container of water. We'll fill it about 3/4 full and set it up where it's okay if some splashes out. Now we need some stuff to put in the water.
All kinds of different stuff.
We're gonna look for a couple things around the fort that are okay to get wet. If you wanna try this experiment at home, make sure you ask before you put anything from your house into the water. Let's see what we found. All right, Squeaks found a penny. I found a stick, and Bill and Webb, they found 2 different spoons, a metal one and a plastic one. Good job, guys. Now, before we get started, let's take a closer look at what we'll be testing. All of these things are made out of different materials, like metal, plastic, and wood. Some of them are pretty small, and some are a little bit bigger. I think we have a pretty good group of objects because they're all pretty different. Now, before we start putting things in the water, let's guess whether each one will sink or float. And let's keep track of our guesses. But how will we... Great idea, Squeaks. We'll use a chart. All right, let's start with the stick. Bill, Webb, what do you think? Will it sink or float? Well, I can tell you guys are pretty excited. Tell us what you're thinking.
Well, in the pond where we live, I've never seen sticks that have sunk. Only ones that float.
Well, that's because you haven't seen the ones that have sunk.
Well, that's because they all float, Webb.
Okay, fine. Put me and Bill down for the stick floats.
Okay, here we go. And it floats. Good job, you two.
Yay!
Next, let's try the metal spoon. What do you think? Will it sink or float?
Well, I've never seen a spoon float.
Me neither.
Quack?
Quack, quack, quack. We think it'll sink.
Okay, let's see. It sinks.
Yeah, we're the smartest ducks in the world.
Yeah. Now, what about the plastic spoon? Do you think it will sink or float?
Quack, quack,
Quack.
quack,
Quack, quack.
quack, quack. Well, it's the same shape as the other spoon.
Yeah, and we think it might sink, just like the metal spoon did.
Okay, let's see. It floats.
Oh.
Bummer.
Well, that's okay, guys. That's how we learn, right?
Yeah, I guess. It's just weird. The other spoon sank.
Well, let's record our results and see if we can find out why it sank after we test our next object. Our next object will be the penny. Do you think it will sink or float?
Well, a penny feels a lot like a metal spoon, so I think it'll sink.
All right. And Webb, what do you think?
Well, it's so light, but kind of small, and I don't usually see things that small floating. I'll have to agree with my sister this time. It's gonna sink.
It sinks!
Whoa!
Now that we've tested all of our objects, let's look at our chart. Some of the objects floated and some of them sank. Let's see. The metal spoon and the penny sank. The plastic spoon and the stick floated. Is there anything that's the same about the things that floated and the things that sank?
Well, we know that the metal thing sank, and the metal spoon feels kind of heavy.
But so does the stick, and the stick floated while the spoon sank. So maybe it's not all about how much something weighs or its shape.
You're right, and that might help us explain why some things float and some things sink. The answer has to do with something called density. Everything, and I mean everything, is made of tiny particles that we can't see. And how dense an object is depends on how much space is between those particles.
Particles?
Jesse, what the quack is a particle?
Now that's an awesome question. Let's use our imaginations and pretend that particles are marbles. We'll start with a bunch of marbles on a table. If you had the marbles all right next to each other, that's kind of how the particles would look inside an object that's dense, like the metal spoon. But if those marbles were spaced really far apart, that'd be more like what the particles are like in something that's less dense, like the plastic spoon. The metal spoon is more dense than the plastic spoon. It's about the same size and shape, but the particles that make it up are closer together than the particles that make up the plastic one. But remember, everything has density, including water.
What?
It's true. Since water has its own density, if something is more dense than the water it's in, it'll sink. The metal spoon and the penny were more dense than the water, so they sank. And the stick and the plastic spoon were less dense than the water, so they floated. So will it sink or will it float? It depends, in part, on density. How did your experiment go?
Did you make some wrong guesses like us?
I bet you got some right.
Let us know what you use in your experiment and how it turns out. Just get help from a grown-up and leave us a note in the comments below.
All right, so density has a lot to do with why things sink or float. And usually we use solid objects, right? So for these balls, the blue one was heavier, so it had more density, so it sunk to the bottom. And the red one had less density, or the particles were spread out, so it floated on top. But can this work with liquids? Can some liquids sink and some float, or do they mix together? I've got one more quick little experiment to show you. And for this, and this is a fun kitchen science experiment at home if you ask your parents if there's any items that you can use to test out. So I just have you could use a glass, a cup, whatever, it's clear. And I'm going to put in a couple items. I have some vegetable oil, I have some corn syrup, and I have some water. So I'm going to put some water into my cup so that we can see it. I hope, looks like this might have a crack in it. I hope we don't leak. All right, now I'm going to, maybe I'll see this. So here's water in here. I'm going to add some vegetable oil. Okay. Do you think the vegetable oil will float, sink, or mix right in? Any predictions? Let's see. I'm going to pour some vegetable oil in there. Kind of mix it up. Can you see that? Can you tell what's happening? Can you see that water at the bottom? And the oil is sitting right on top of it. So it didn't mix in, it's just sitting there. Just like if we put a plastic spoon in the water. All right, the next thing I have is some corn syrup. And it's kind of thicker. So the oil is less dense than the water, okay? So here, it's very sticky. It's taking a while to come out. All right. Can you see? It's too bad they're all kind of yellow. And I'm wearing yellow too. It doesn't help. All right. So can you see that there are 3 layers here? That corn syrup stuck to the bottom. There's water in the middle and there's oil on top. So it's in 3 different layers. It didn't mix at all. Now I wonder if I try this, hopefully this lid will work. I'm gonna flip it upside down and see what happens. So I'm gonna mix it up. I'll just stir it around. All right, it's all mixed up now, right? What's happening to it? Can you see it still separating? It's still in 3 parts. Just like if I put a rubber duck and this marble in here, it doesn't matter if I mix up my water, it's still gonna stay where it does because it's not changing the density. So pretty cool how that works. You can try this at home if you ask your parents. See if there's any liquids in your pantry or your cupboard that you could use, like syrup for pancakes or milk or orange juice. Like, does it mix together or does it separate? Be kind of interesting to find out. So things sink and float even if they are liquids. All right. I have one more thing I want to show you, and this is another experiment you can try at home, okay? This takes one more thing from the kitchen, and it is foil. Does anybody have foil at home? And ask your parents. All you need is one little piece, and the goal for this is to try to make a boat that will float in water. So if you don't have a big tub like this, which I wouldn't have something like this at home, I could use a mixing bowl, or you could just fill up your sink in the bathroom or in the kitchen. Ask your parents first. And what you're gonna do is with a piece of foil, you are going to try to make a boat that will float on top of the water. So you can do it any way you want. You can try to just crumple it up. I'm gonna make some sides. Doesn't take very long. And once you have a boat, you can put it in your water and see if it'll float, okay? So my boat is floating. Now comes the fun part. You get to test it out and see how long you can have it float. So I have pennies because those are pretty easy to find around. So I'm gonna see how many pennies I can put in here before my boat sinks to the bottom, okay? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I missed that one. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and it's still staying. I'm gonna try to move my screen so you can see this real quick. Okay, can you see my pennies in there? So it's still floating at 15. See how many you can get before your boat sinks to the bottom, because eventually it'll be too heavy and it will go down, okay? All right, so tomorrow we are going to take this idea of sinking and floating, and we are going to look at a machine that goes down in the ocean, a submarine, and we're going to learn about some submarines, okay? All right. Thank you guys so much for coming today, and I will see you tomorrow, I hope. If you have questions or you want to stay and chat for a minute, please do so. And if not, I will see you next time, okay? All right. Bye, guys.